Hello, welcome to Sunday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic. The weather seems to be a bit more clement today, and we have what should be a brilliant puzzle for you. This is by the Dutch master, Aad Van De Wetering. I had an email from his friend Ard Thoen, who said they've been working on tessellating Sudoku grids with pentominoes, as you do, and Ard has created this little number for us. So we're going to have a look at that and the rules in a moment. I need to mention three things on top of that. March the 2nd, which is tomorrow, is the day when our Chess Sudoku app is supposed to be coming out. So do look out for that. We can't control exactly when it's released on Android and the App Store. We hope it will be tomorrow, and it should certainly be released on Steam tomorrow for those of you who like to play on PC or Mac. Other news, it's the start of the month. Now that means that for those of you who sponsor us on Patreon, of course, many thanks. It's really appreciated. And your reward puzzle needs to come out soon. Now Mark and I have been working on that. It's nearly ready, I think. I can tell you it'll be a sandwich Sudoku with a little bit of a twist, but I think you'll enjoy it. So keep your eyes on your Patreon emails if you are a patron. And apart from that, just to mention as well, the UK Puzzle Association's David McNeill's Hybrid Sudoku test, that is live at the moment. That means we can't show you any puzzles from it, but these are handcrafted puzzles by another master Sudoku setter. He was the one who David set the elephant puzzle. For those who've been following the channel for a couple of weeks, I'm sure you'll remember that. Definitely worth checking out. I'll put a link in the commentary under the puzzle so you can have a look, and if you want to play this puzzle, then just click on the link, the first link under the puzzle. That will take you to this page where you can play along. Now, how does this work? Well, you can see I've marked in the two main diagonals, so we need to include the numbers from 1 to 9 on both of those diagonals, and there are lots, I think there are 9 Z-shaped pentominoes in the grid. Now in each one of these Z-shaped pentominoes, the numbers must be a consecutive series. They don't have to be in order. So you can see down here there's a 2 in this one. Well, that means that this pentomino either contains the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, or it contains the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. We don't know which, but as it must contain a consecutive sequence, those are the two options. Now obviously as well, we don't know the order, so if it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that could be, it could be like this, it could be something like that, or it could be 1, it could be any order. So we have to bear that in mind, and with that, let's get cracking and see how to solve this. Now, as usual with Ard's puzzles, there is a minimal amount of information given, just 5 givens in the grid. Right, okay, so we've got a 1 here. So this pentomino we know must contain the numbers 2, 3, 4 and 5, i.e. the consecutive numbers from the number 1. And then we've got an 8 here. So the way my mind works with diagonals is I'm always looking for numbers that are off the diagonal rather than numbers that are necessarily on the diagonal. So if I look at this main diagonal here, I can see that I've not put an 8 on it yet. This 8 prevents those 3. This 1 is meaning none of these can be an 8, so there must be an 8. Yeah, okay, so there must be an 8 in one of these 3 positions. This can't be an 8 because of the 8 here, and I can't put an 8 in the pentomino because 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 would be the max. So 6 would be the maximum digit I could have in this pentomino. So we get a digit, another digit, we get an 8 there. Now that immediately puts an 8 look in this pentomino, not on the diagonal. Okay. So I guess this pentomino needs to contain the numbers 3, 4 and 5. So the 6 could be either outside the pentomino or not, but we know that 7 and 9 are definitely in these spaces, so I'm going to note that in case that turns out to be useful. Okay. So what should we do next? This 6 is quite helpful, isn't it? Because that means that this pentomino here can't contain a 7, 8 or a 9. So this is also a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pentomino. Those ones can't be 2. This time we know, this 8 now is nice. That locks an 8 into one of those 2 squares. Locks an 8 into one of those 2 squares. And these 3 squares have got to be 7, 8 and 9 in some order. Now, so this pentomino does contain an 8. So this pentomino here, if it contains an 8, it can't contain a 1, 2 or a 3. Okay, now is that useful? Probably is, but I can't quite see how. This pentomino, look, that pentomino can't contain an 8 at all. So this pentomino, in fact, now I think about it, every pentomino, of course, must contain a 5. Now, is that helpful? That might be helpful, because if we look at these 2 extreme pentominoes here, we know that there is definitely a 5 in both of those pentominoes. Now we know that this needs to have a 5 in it, and it can't be in either of these 2 squares therefore, so there must be a pentomino in one of those positions. But look, we've also got this pentomino in the middle, so yeah, okay, so there is a pattern going on here regarding 5s, because if we look at this pentomino, again, we can't have a 5 in one of these squares, so we know the 5s in this pentomino are either up here or down here. Now if they're up here, the 5 in this pentomino will be forced down there. If on the other hand they're down here, the 5 on this pentomino will be forced up there. So there is always a 5 in one of those squares. Now, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it might be. Okay, so what do we do now? Answers on a postcard, please. I'm not immediately seeing what I'm meant to do now. This is very typical for Aad's puzzles, though. They are not easy, and it's often, you know, they're very, very linear. We have to find the next step in the puzzle, otherwise we're just not going to make progress. And there probably is only one next step that we're meant to find. So, what is that step? There's something, look. We've got a 7 and a 9 here, and a 7 and a 9 in one of these 3 squares. So, looking at box 7 and box 9, we know we've got a full complement of 7s and 9s. Therefore, we can't have any 7 and 9 in those squares. Another way of thinking about that would be to look at row 9 and say, where can we put a 7 and a 9? And you can see that this square can't have one. So we know there's a 7 and a 9 in these 2 squares, or the 2 of these 3 squares. Now, that is very, very beautiful, because now where can we put a 7 and a 9 in this row? Let's look very carefully at this. Obviously, if the 7 and the 9 are down there, they can't be in any of those 3 squares. They can't be in these 2 squares, so we've pencil marked where they can go in this block already. And they can't go in those 2 squares. So in fact, these 2 squares, look, are a 7-9 pair. So this one can't be an 8. Ah, sorry, I'm messing up my notation. This one can't be an 8, which means this is an 8. Now, now that's very nice, because now the 8s are not on this other diagonal, look. So we must have an 8 in one of those 3 squares. This 8 means it must go there. And now there is an 8 in one of those 2 positions. Now that's not, we have to be a bit careful. That's not an 8-5 pair, because the 5 could go down here. Now, okay. Now this square is interesting. If we look at this block, we've got to place the numbers 6, 7 and 9. Let's write those in so you can see. Well, there's a 6 on this diagonal. So this square is a 7 or a 9. Now that is lovely. That gives us a 7-9 pair on this diagonal. Now, the way my mind works, because I've done a lot of diagonal puzzles, in fact, this is absolutely beautiful. This is a beautiful pattern. I should finish my sentences first. Right. When I see this pattern in a diagonal Sudoku, the squares I immediately look to normally are this square and this square, because I know that neither of these squares now can contain a 7 or a 9. And you can see that for yourself. If we try and put a 7 in this square, what happens to this diagonal now? I can't put a 7 here, I can't put a 7 here, and I get repeated 9s. That's not going to work. So I know that there's no 7 or a 9 in this square or this square. But here, the Z pentomino is actually incredibly beautiful, because that allows us to extrapolate that logic to more squares. So it's not only true to say this can't be a 7 or a 9, it's also true to say this can't be a 7 or a 9, because this square, let's show you, would see this one in the row, but it sees this one in the pentomino. So there is no 7 or 9 in any of those squares. And look, there is an 8 in the pentomino. So we know for certain there is a 7 in the pentomino. We don't know there's a 9, but we know there is a 7. And we've proved it can't go in any of those 3 squares. So it goes there, which gives us a 9. That creates a 6-7 pair in this row. And if we look at this 9, it has a very nice effect on this pentomino. It rules out 9 from every open position. So we now know that this pentomino needs to contain a 4, 5 and a 6 as well. So we can pencil mark those squares as 4, 5 and 6. Now hang on, let's have a look at this pentomino maybe. Because this pentomino contains a 9, therefore it needs to contain a 6 and a 7. Now we know there is a 6 or a 7 in this square, but there can't also be a 6 or a 7 in this square. So one of these 2 squares needs to be a 6 or a 7. Well, it can't be a 7, so it must be a 6. Now we've also pencil marked 8s into those squares. It's simply gorgeous Sudoku setting this. It is absolutely stunning. And now, because this is unwinding the puzzle slowly along these pentominos. We've now locked a 6. This now has to be a 7. That puts a 6 over there. we now can't put a 5 into those squares. So the 5 we know from our earlier logic must be down here. So there's no 5 in either of those squares. So this must be a 5. This can't be a 4. Oh, no, can't be a 4. I want to remove the 4 as an option there. This can't be a 5, look. So we've done... this 7 sees that 9. I should have spotted that before. Let's hope that wasn't too important. This 5 sees this 5 as well. That shifts a 5 into one of those two squares. So this can't be a 5. There must be a 5 in one of these two positions. That's nice, because if we now look at the top block, we managed to lock a 5, well, into one of those three squares. Now, we can't quite rule it out of the diagonal yet. Sixes, we now know there's a 6 in one of those three squares. Okay. Now let's have a stare at this for a second. This 5s are important, aren't they? Because this square can't be a 5. So we now know the 5 is in one of those two squares. And that means this can't be a 5. This is a 5. Now this pentomino we know needs to have a 7 in it because it has a 5 and a 6 and an 8. The 7 can't go here, so it goes in the vertical position. And this square can't be a 9 because of the 9 here, therefore it must be a 4 to complete the consecutive condition. This is just a wonderful, wonderful puzzle. It really is. It's so original. 7's in these two squares, so that's got to be a 7 down there at the bottom. There's a 1 in one of these three squares. I will highlight that, and a 2 in one of these three squares because of this 2. Right. So we've done some brilliant work. This is a 9 because there was a 7-9 pair. So there's a 9 in one of these three squares. Just wondering if we can do more with 9s. Yeah, let's look down here. So there's no 9 in those squares. But I forgot this. I was just about to write 6 into those two squares, but that would be wrong. I can't assume that. It's possible these are both 1. Bother. That's definitely not 5. That's definitely not 5. We know that this has got to contain 3, 4 and 5, but again, I'm not quite seeing how to do much with that. And if we look at this diagonal, we need 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 into those three squares. So let's just take a look. We can eliminate 2 and 4 from this one. And I can eliminate 5 from that because the 5 must be in that pentomino. So this becomes a 1 or a 3. I'm just pausing there because down here we got this 7-9 pattern going on. I'm just wondering if I can force another square to be a 1 or a 3. The 5 must be in one of these two squares. We know it's not outside the Z pentomino. So this is the 5. That means this is the 5, look. Which means the 5 is in one of those two squares, so that's a 5 on that pentomino. That forces this square to be a 5. And this square to be a 5. Feels like we're sort of making good progress with 5s now. Which, are there any 5s we haven't placed? Yes, this one, that's got to be a 5 on the diagonal. That's simply normal Sudoku operating on that top box. Now this pentomino has an 8 in it, so it's also got a 7 in it, and we have a 7 here. So the 7 shifts up there, and that puts a 7 there. Look, that's nice. 7 in one of those two squares. We know this must have a 6. Now is it? Wow, we don't know yet. The 6 could, I think, be in any position there. We also know there's a 6 in this shape. And again, the 6 I think can go anywhere. But I notice, look, we've now got 6s locked into row 1 and row 3 in 2 different rows. So the 6 in this row must be in one of those 2 squares. This 6 rules out this one. We now know there's a 3 and a 4 in this little run of 3. We don't know whether the other digit is a 1 or a 6. Now, let's look at this square. Because looking at the column, we've got to place 1, 3, 6 and 7. So this square can't be a 7. So it's a 1, 3 or a 6. Now, this can't be a 6 either, because we know the 6 must be in the pentomino. Good grief. So this is a 1, 3 pair. So as there is a 1 in this pentomino, we now know that this pentomino is filled with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So this can't be a 6. Fixes the 6 there. These two have got to be 2 and 4. We have a 4 here, so obviously that's the 2. This is the 4. This contains an 8. Right, so if we look at these 2s, there's no 2 in the pentomino here. So the 2 must be in one of those 2 squares. Don't think we know which one yet. These squares have got to be 1, 3, 7 and 9. The 7 here shifts the 7 downwards, which makes this a 7 on the left hand side. This 2 here forces the central square to be the 2, often the most useful in a diagonal Sudoku. Yeah, so that rules that square out from having a 2 in it, so the 2 must be here in this box. That's just due to our pencil marking. This must be a 2 just by Sudoku. So now looking at this, there's definitely a 2 in one of these 2 squares. And we know it can't be on the diagonal, so that square is a 2. This square can't be a 2 because it's on the diagonal. This square can't be a 2 because of that one, so that square's a 2. That forces a 2 into this position. This can't be a 2, so we know this is a 2, and I think we've now finally located all the 2s. So we've got 1, 3, 4 left to place this way round, look, and if we come down the other diagonal, we still need to place 3, 4 and 6, I think. So I think this one can be any of those. So let's label it. And this one, that one also can be any of those. We still haven't disambiguated whether this pentomino here contains a 1 or contains a 6. But the 1, 3 here, of course, forces that to be a 4. That's going to be useful, isn't it? So that's not a 4 down there. Oh, actually, I thought that was going to be more useful than it was. Gives me a 1, 3 here, but and locks a 4 into one of those two squares, but I'm not sure it goes any further than that. Okay, so this, if we look now at this box, we now know there's a 9 in this pentomino. It can only go here. And the reason we know that is we've pencil marked the 6, 7s, 8s already. So this is in effect a naked single. That locks this square to be a 9. So now the 9 is in one of those two positions up here. Oh, but of course this doesn't contain an 8. It's funny, I was focusing really on the blue numbers, but if this doesn't have an 8 in it, it doesn't have a 9 in it, therefore that must be the 9. That forces a 9 into one of those squares. And, oh, that's nice, that gives us the 9 here. And the reason I like that 9 is that it fixes this as an 8. That might have been sitting there for a while actually because of that 8, but I didn't spot it. Now we've got 1s and 3s into those squares. The 3-4 pair resolves them. Is that the first one we've entered in the grid? No, yeah, it is. There was this one at the start, but that's only that's the first one we've gone further than that with. The 3 means that's not a 3. That's not a 1. 6, 1, 3. So another thing we can do looking at this, I suppose, is we can do our diagonal trick again. So if we look at these two squares on the diagonal, we can find cells that see those two squares, i.e. those ones. We now know these two squares cannot contain a 1 or a 3. Ah, that's beautiful. It's just so good, because now there is no 1 in this square. And if there's no 1 in this square, and we know there's no 1 in this square because of the 1 here, we know that the 1 is on the pentomino. And that means this square is not a 6. This is a 1, 3, 4 triple. These two squares are 6 and 7. And surely I can resolve that, can't I? Yes, the 6 here resolves it. That's a 6, that's a 7, that's a 7, that's a 3. So the 7, the 6, we know the 6 then shifts up here. This square can't be a 6 anymore, so it must be a 7. These two squares are a 6, 8 pair now. We've now got a 3, 4 pair on this diagonal, so this one is a 6. It removes the 6 from those squares, and this 6 resolves the 6, 8 pair on the other side. Now there's an 8 into one of those squares. These squares have got to be 1, 3 and 4. So we've now forced the 3 onto the pentomino. Now if we force the 3 onto the pentomino and there's a 5 in the pentomino, there must also be a 4 in the pentomino, and that 4 fixes the order. So that's a 4, that's a 3. This square is a 1, that gives us the 1 and the 3 over here now. Locks a 1, 8 pair into this box, which shifts the 9 over. This 9 actually, would have allowed me to place a 9 down there. Please don't get too cross with me for missing things. There's a lot. It's not that easy always to solve the puzzles perfectly when you're discussing them at the same time. Anyone who thinks it is, I invite you to try it. Now, I've got a 1 here, so this is a 4, this is a 3, this is a 1. Could have got that 1 before because of the 3 on the diagonal. 3 here means this is not 3, this is not 4. Where's the... that square, look, I can put a 3 in here, and that's going to resolve everything. That forces 1, 4, 3, 4, 3, 3, 6, 6, 8, 8, 1. This is a 1. This hopefully is a 4. Have I filled in all the squares? No. Let's not make that mistake. 6, 4 there. Yeah, I think that's it. So what a beautiful puzzle. Not easy at all. So sticking points, I think, will be this 7-9 pair was not easy to see. And then we had this beautiful logic with the 7 and the 9. That was just utterly stunning. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Do let me know in the comments. I really appreciate it when you guys comment on the video and let us know whether you enjoyed the puzzle, whether it was too hard, whether it was too easy. This is one of the reasons we make these videos, is to get the feedback. So do let us know, and we'll see you tomorrow on Cracking the Cryptic.